Okay, this is Geometry Module 1, Lesson 7. And in this particular lesson, we're going to build on Lesson 6, which we're going to throw the concept of what a transversal is and a few other concepts that we're going to use to create equations from pictures and solve for variables. You will review formally learned geometric facts and practice citing geometric justifications in the anticipation of unknown angle proofs, which is going to be here in a couple of lessons. Okay, here we go. The focus of today's lesson is really, again, trying to determine and find the unknown angles. And so we're going to focus today on the concept of parallel lines that are crossed by what's called a transversal. So you're going to hear me talk about parallel lines today, and then this idea of what is a transversal. Two lines are cut by transversal, and that corresponding angles are equal. If this is the case, then the lines are parallel. The concept that if parallel lines are cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are equal. And so these two things kind of go back and forth. They basically say the same thing, except they're sort of worded in opposite form. Use the diagram to the right to find and determine X and Y. And so I'm going to look over here, and based on what we learned in Lesson 6, we need to be able to take a picture, as we have here, and we want to put it into an equation based on a certain relationship that we know to be true. So we're looking for relationships. And the first thing I note here in reviewing Lesson 6 is that I note that there's a little mark here. This means that this angle is 90 degrees. I also note that we have a straight line from A to B. That means that this angle here is also these two angles, x plus 8 and 2x minus 8, they also equal 90 degrees. That's really important because with that fact alone, the fact that these two angles here are complementary, and complementary angles, as we know, are any number of angles that add up to 90 degrees. This is going to allow us to write an equation. And so here in finding X, my first thing is to, again, picture equation and then I notice something here, that there's a positive 8 and there's a minus 8, and that reduces to 0. I then can add like terms. There's my algebra coming in, divide by 3, and my answer for X is equal to 30. In solving for Y, this angle right here, I noticed that these two angles are vertical angles, and we just learned about vertical angles. Vertical angles are equal, and so that allows us to set up an equation, picture, equation, solve. So a little bit of review from Lesson 6. We're looking for relationships to be able to help us solve for missing angles and missing variables. 1, it said name a pair of vertical angles. Well, the red angles I just named are vertical, and so I'm just going to go ahead and label those correctly. I would label them A, O, as we go from the original, and it's O. Angle AO, AOC is congruent to angle DOB. So that's one set of vertical angles that we use to help us solve for Y. And then it says find the measure of angle BOF. And so being able to understand that terminology, and so B, here's B, O, F. Being able to find this angle, well, once again, we're looking for relationships. We know that Y is 52. We know that X is 30. And so if we were to call this Z, finding this would be simply setting up the equation 52 plus 120 minus 24 plus Z is equal to, and I'll let you finish that out on your own. Okay, so that is sort of a review of lesson 6. And also, I'm going to let you finish it. You can pause the video and solve for Z on your own, which is also angle BOF. Okay, we're back to the video and wanted to, again, we're going to look at some vocabulary. So quickly, it says in the diagram to the right, given line AB and line CD in a plane, some technical words there, a third line EF is called the transversal. So as we begin to, again, use our math words, this is a transversal, whereas the two red lines are parallel. They never cross. And you'll note these little marks right here mean parallel. The blue line intersects the two red lines, and therein lies where we're going to focus today. There are 3 terms you need to be aware of, and they all 3 help us set up equations. First of all, corresponding angles. They are equal in measure. It's very important to see that. So we're going to list all the corresponding angles. B and F are in the same relative position. So B is equal to F. A and E. Same relative position. C and G. And these are all corresponding. And then, of course, we have D and H. And those angles are called, once again, corresponding. They're in the same corresponding location. Alternate interior angles are simply inside, and so the interior angles are in here. Whereas the exterior angles are going to be out here and here. And alternate means basically on the opposite side. So for instance, here, D and E are equal. D is equal to E. Angle D and angle E are alternate interior angles, and they are equal. And there's one more pair. Angle C is congruent to angle F. And so there are your alternate interior angles. The third concept is same side interior. And so again, I mentioned that these are the interior angles. Inside meaning in between the two parallel lines. And same side means just that, on the same side. Now, whereas the previous ones were equal, these D plus F equals 180. And so also, by definition, interior angles, same side, E or C rather, and E. C plus E is equal to 180. So the first two, corresponding angles and alternate interior angles, represent angles that are equal to one another. The third, they're two angles that add up to 180 or are supplementary. We're going to use these things, these types of facts, to help us solve for unknown angle measures. Begin to wrap this up. Let's look at how we're basically going to look at these concepts and help us solve for missing angles. Number one, I notice that these angles are corresponding angles. So I first of all want to recognize that I have corresponding angles. And I know that corresponding angles are equal. And so it's really important that I understand that they're equal. That means there's no work. The answer is 48. So I don't have to set up an equation other than the fact that we know that A is equal to 48. Number two, I notice that same side interior. Same side interior angles. They are supplementary. I can create an equation. B plus 48 is equal to 180. So then I can solve using my algebra skills. Number three, I notice that these are, again, interior angles, but they are opposite each other, which means we know that this means we have alternate interior angles. And that's good because we know that these two then are equal. Angle C is equal to 48. And there's no work to be done. The last one we're going to look at, number 4. And basically, this is one that I alluded to in the previous section. And we look here, we said, well, these are exterior angles. And they're on opposite sides of the transversal. And so, yes, as a matter of fact, they are called alternate exterior angles. And yes, they are equal. So we're going to use these facts today to help us solve for unknown angles. We're going to take these skills and see if we can use, along with what we learned from lesson 6 in problem solving today, solving for unknown angles. One more thing I want to mention for lesson 7. It's the addition of something called an auxiliary line. And so in number 5, actually the last example here, we're going to look at what's called an auxiliary line. It's one that you would draw in. You would draw in to help in determining an unknown line. So for instance here, the auxiliary line is shown right here in the dotted line. And it will help us determine, for instance, some missing angles. So for example, in this first particular problem that you're looking at, the reason why it's important to understand the use of this auxiliary line is if we want to find angle W, well, if we find parts E and F and then add them up, angle E plus angle F, they both come together to represent angle W. And so the reason why this is important is because if I draw that line, the auxiliary line through, I notice that angle E is equal to 41. And I also know, and the reason for that is, yes, alternate equal. So 41 must be equal to E. For the same reason, angle 35 must be equal to, if these lines are parallel, angle 35 must be equal to angle F. Thus, 41 plus 35 is equal to angle W. In this case, we have angle W equal to 76. So you're going to be challenged to use and to come up with at times this idea of an auxiliary line to help and assist us in solving for unknown angles. Okay, that'll wrap it up. Lesson 7.